Welcome back to my series combing through every piece of music in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and reporting back on all the little nuggets of wisdom I come across. Can you smell that? That salty sea breeze? We are leaving Junon soon. Not yet, but soon. Just 2 episodes left in Chapter 4. Let's jump in. It makes sense for the richest company in the world, Shinra, to have access to the most expensive and cutting-edge pre-rendered cutscenes, because here now is our second one of those since we've arrived in Upper Junon 2 episodes ago. But unlike that last one, for which I was able to locate a sound effects-free version of the track within the game's PC version, for this cutscene I was unsuccessful. When this latest variation of Rufus's welcoming ceremony kicks in, I could not find a version with clean audio, so please bear with the sounds of the crowd, marching feet, and Roche's crimson hog. Maybe I just missed the audio file? There are thousands of them after all. But another possibility is that they didn't include this duty-free version of the audio track since it is so similar to the following version of Rufus's welcoming ceremony. The 2 tracks might even be one and the same, but with the former taken from a point in the track beyond the usual loop point. Either way, I'm going to jump forward to that second version instead, since not only do we have clean audio of that one, it was also included on the original soundtrack. This is Rufus's welcoming ceremony inauguration parade, which, I must admit, these variations are definitely starting to blend into each other. How can we set this one apart? Well, it's got the most pomp of all the variations so far, and while it isn't the fastest, that would be Mitsuto Suzuki's vocal arrangement version coming in at 123 BPMs compared to this version's 120, it still feels the most lively to me, thanks in large part to the very enthusiastic triangle playing. It has all the little flourishes you would hope for in what is, narratively, the most important version of the theme, since we are finally at the parade itself. And speaking of the parade, now's a good time to discuss its accompanying minigame. I'm refraining from calling it a rhythm game since, even though it looks like a drool-worthy next-gen version of Sega's Hatsune Miku Project Diva series, with interactive face buttons dramatically placed inside of a 3D scene, it isn't, in fact, a rhythm game. Unlike Project Diva, the timing of the button prompts is completely disconnected from the timing of the music, and you have zero impact on the music itself. If you played the equivalent minigame in the Honeybee Inn from Remake, you know what you're getting here, and frankly, I'm once again so crestfallen they didn't make it a proper rhythm game. Luckily, we've got the staggeringly detailed piano rhythm game in Rebirth to contend with, but personally speaking, matching face buttons to the music, Project Diva style, is way more satisfying to me than tilting the analog sticks in time with the music, so I would gladly swap the 2, given the choice. It does feel like a bit of a missed opportunity, but I suppose you could argue that the Rufus's welcoming ceremony track playing at this moment in the game is non-diegetic, and that Cloud and his infantry units aren't actually trying to be in sync with any external music, but instead just to themselves. But the cutscene opens with a marching band, so they can't be that far away. Worse still is that these cutscene sequences are entirely static, so there's no reason the QuickTime events couldn't be tied to music. You select which infantry formations you'd like to perform, which impacts the visuals, but that decision happens before the sequence is even loaded in, so I'm struggling to see any reason why they couldn't have synced the timing. It was definitely a deliberate decision to have this not be a rhythm game, as opposed to some oversight, which, fine, I get it, not everyone likes rhythm games, and I could see some playtesters potentially rioting at the thought of a mandatory rhythm game. But as a rhythm game, admirer, lover, devourer, I think this undermines what is otherwise one of the most technically impressive cutscenes in the entire game. Sorry, I promise I'm almost done, but on the music side, I think the use of Furukawa's inauguration parade is also very underwhelming here. The track is fine, but for what is essentially a 5-minute long cutscene, The track's minute-and-a-half long loop repeating 3 times feels less than ideal. The fact that your formation choice has no impact at all on the track's arrangement is a bit of a bummer. By choosing not to have this being a timing-locked rhythm game, it meant crossfading tracks or instrument layers based on what formation the player chose would have been not only easier to program, but also added a bit more individuality to your performance. If I choose the 3-star difficulty Bahamut formation, bring back the awesome Suzuki and Tokusashi vocal arrangement of the track to give it added weight. Similarly, the very first variation of the theme that we covered, that omitted the main melody, would be interesting to hear if you chose the easiest formation, to help convey that, yeah, you're doing it, but you're kinda missing something. Okay, I've said my piece. Having said all that, I really enjoyed the spectacle of this whole sequence. Hey, is that Glenn Lodbrok? Hey, quick PSA. At the end of this episode, there will be part 3 of Midgar Mysteries, which dives into the mystery surrounding the identity of the composer of Glenn's theme. I mention all of this because I've heard from a few folks who didn't realize the last 2 episodes concluded with this new series within a series, and I would be sad to hear you missed it, since the private investigator who makes those put a lot of time into them. This is just a quick heads up to stick around for that. I haven't checked in with the investigator in a bit, but last I checked, it seemed like he might have found a smoking gun. Anyway, following the parade, we cut to Tsung in a monitoring station, eyeing Glenn, but more importantly, his sweetheart Aerith. The track used here is the Turks theme Office, which first shows up in Final Fantasy VII Remake during a cutscene of the Turks in, you guessed it, an office. It's a fun, more laid-back version of the Turks theme, but I think the more important part is that it further confirms something a bit disappointing about Rebirth's in-game credits. This track was arranged by Daiki Ishikawa of Final Fantasy XIV and XVI fame. I actually mentioned Ishikawa all the way back in episode 8, where I speculated that the results track from the Hustle de Chocobo minigame just outside the Chocobo Ranch, which sounds a lot like the Wackabox results track from Remake, might have been composed and/or arranged by Daiki Ishikawa. However, his name wasn't in the credits. Still no news on the Rebirth Plus soundtrack. Any day now, surely. But hearing Daiki Ishikawa's Turks theme Office is at least confirmation that in a more just world, Ishikawa's name would be included in the Rebirth credits. But he isn't listed there. Neither is Takafumi Imamura of Final Fantasy XIV, XVI, and Hip Hop de Chocobo fame. Since while his music is featured in Rebirth, because it was written prior to Rebirth, i.e. Remake, Square has decided that they are not worth crediting in-game. I'm not a fan of that decision at all, but it is what it is. So far, Daiki Ishikawa and Takafumi Imamura are the only 2 uncredited arrangers or composers on Rebirth. I wonder if we'll come across more as we continue our unknown journey. Okay, the last thing I want to touch on for this scene is Tsung's ringtone. Yeah, that's the Shinra leitmotif. Part of me is like, man, Tsung is such a dweeb for using the theme of the company he works for as his ringtone. But more realistically, that's probably a Shinra-made phone, and that's just the stock ringtone for everyone. You'd be lucky if you can even change it. It also reveals that the Shinra theme is a known, in-world diegetic melody. I wonder who wrote it? Maybe the FF7 world's equivalent of Justin Timberlake. I bet it was that piano dude Dorian. Dude is probably flush thanks to all those royalties. It would explain how he can travel the world so fast. Following the short scene with Tsung, we then jump to the festivities commendation ceremony. Depending on how you performed in the parade, you get one of 2 different tracks, but don't get too excited. The 2 pieces are nearly identical, the only difference being an additional 5-second intro to the piece if you scored above 100,000 points. The opening melody skirts around the Final Fantasy main theme, though I don't know if that's a deliberate homage or if I'm just reading too much into it. Afterward, the track transitions to our most unique variation of Rufus's welcoming ceremony. Anyhow, we've left the marching band arrangement and we've dramatically slowed things down. Things are classy and elegant. The brass no longer dominates, instead sharing the spotlight with strings and some woodwinds. Because this is a Furukawa track, it begs the question, are these real instruments or virtual? I honestly can't tell. If the original soundtrack hadn't credited this as a Furukawa track, I don't think I would have realized this was his track, nor even considered it might be virtual. With Rufus now having been welcomed with a ceremony, the track moves away from Rufus's welcoming ceremony and morphs into something entirely new. This is a new Furukawa composition that perfectly matches Rufus's cool-headed and dignified speech. Sure, he might have blown his load right before the parade began, but here we are seeing a new, calmer face for Shinra, the dawn of a new era. This sounds like a big victory speech at the end of a Hollywood blockbuster. The good guys won. Mission accomplished. Most players are unlikely to fall for the savvy ruse, but the music, at least, is surprisingly earnest and convincing. It makes for a fun contrast to Cloud's speech from last episode, also likely composed by Furukawa. There, the music and speech start from an awkward position of generic platitudes before eventually finding its natural intensity. Cloud is no born leader, but along his journey, he'll get there. Rufus, on the other hand, was literally born for this. He has trained his whole life. Just like his sophisticated, rousing music, Rufus has the commanding power and privilege to make you a believer. Going back to the question of whether or not this is virtual, do you think that's a real choir? My first thought was, of course it's real, but this is Furukawa. The man can do anything. They are mixed a little further back, making the specific words or mouth sounds they are making very hard to make out. Choir sample libraries are generally really good at reproducing vowel and consonant sounds, but when it comes to reproducing full words or sentences, it becomes a lot easier to hear the limitations. Unless you're going for a deliberately unnatural Hatsune Miku style effect, of course. The fact that the individual words are very hard to make out in this track is maybe a clue that it's not a live choir. But I could be completely off base. Ultimately, doesn't matter that much. Sounds great either way. I wonder if this new Furukawa composition will be used again in part 3. We already have a theme for Rufus, so it's a bit hard to imagine them using this new one instead. But actually, I can think of one scene where this track would be awesome. I've got a scene in mind where they could play this commendation ceremony track verbatim, and it would be very dramatic. Because Rude and the rest of the Glabrescent family did not show up to the parade in time, it means the 7th Infantry gets the top prize. Yeah, that's the timbre of some Furukawa trumpets, alright. No doubt about it in my mind. There's an initial swell that then leads into the classic Final Fantasy fanfare. This is our third version of the fanfare so far, following Yoshitaka Suzuki's Fort Condor and Daiki Ishikawa's VR variations, but this is our first Rebirth original take on the track. It's good and fits in musically, what with the brass and marching drum snare focus. You really can't go wrong with FF7 fanfare arrangements. Actually, speaking of powerful ringtones, I remember a while back, I had Smooth McGroove's God tier a cappella arrangement of the fanfare as my ringtone for like a good year or so. It was a fantastic idea at first, but I noticed I just stopped answering the phone. I would just let it play out in full. How could I not? It's just that good. Anyhow, this Regal Infantry version's not that good, but it's still pretty solid. Okay, we've got one last track to cover, and I'm pretty sure this is a Furukawa track again. Man, ever since we got Topside, they have really been keeping Furukawa busy. We just can't get away from the guy. Or at least I think it's him. Lots of speculation on my part, but frankly, with the speed at which Square is not putting out the Rebirth Plus soundtrack, it's emboldening my worst tendencies. It means I can say stuff like, fact, this is a Furukawa track. Or fact, the Rebirth Plus OST is never coming out. Fact, composed Glenn's theme. Oops, I'm getting ahead of myself. Scratch that last one. Anyway, my hunch is that this is a Furukawa track because it's used near several confirmed Furukawa tracks, and we've seen so far in Remake and Rebirth that there's usually one primary arranger per section of the game, which makes sense from a work delegation standpoint. We had a lot of Shotaro Shima in Chapter 1 and 3, lots of Yoshinori Nakamura in the first half of Chapter 4, and now a boatload of Furukawa in the second. Also, the way this track deftly shifts between subtle Uematsu leitmotifs is very reminiscent of the outro to Furukawa's own Elena track from Chapter 3. There sure were some contentious melodies in that track, and this one here scratches a similar itch. There is a lot to cover, so let's get into it. The low brooding strings set the ominous tone, but it's the low brass that introduces our first musical idea. We have an ascending motif, similar to the A section from the Shinra theme, but with an ambiguous resolution. It evokes the general feeling of the Shinra company, but there's something different here. Better? Worse? None can say yet. If there was any doubt that Furukawa, or whoever arranged this, was going for the Shinra theme here, this next section confirms it. We've shifted to Shinra's B section's cadence, although once again this new chord progression only gives you the contour of the original. As the action shifts to Red and Barrett in the crowd, so too does the music. There's a playful double bass melody and some staccato strings playing atop it. It's a little muddy and I can't figure out if it's calling back to something. Do you have any theories as to what we're hearing? Next, Barrett spots Yuffie, and on cue we hear... Or at least I think that's the right melody. Whether it's the same notes or not, it's clearly got Yuffie energy. Next we return to Rufus and the party, as does the music. Once Rufus refers to Cloud by his name, we get a percussive accent to mark the dramatic turn. Although once again, I'm not sure if this is an Uematsu reference or a Furukawa, or whomever, original. The response strings make me think of a specific point in One Winged Angel. But that is a big stretch on my part. As Cloud takes off his helmet, we get another orchestral swell of ambiguous origin. Though if we listen specifically to the low strings melody, you can hear a bit of Let the Battles Begin. Let the Battles Begin, or maybe Shinra again. The two motifs are shockingly similar. We get a dour two-note brass motif next. Evocative of some of the more somber response melodies from the opening to the Final Fantasy VII main theme. Although, once again, that's a fairly generic bad guy musical motif, so the similarities there could be coincidental. We then return to our Shinra's A section, but with a fun, slow-moving ostinato. Next, on the camera cut showing off more of the army, the B section from Shinra returns, more explicitly than before. This is a good, creepy moment reminding us that Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith are completely surrounded. Our next big shift happens when Rufus mentions Sephiroth. At which point, we get some very clear low strings referencing those chosen by the planet. There's also a new low-passed electric percussion in the mix, which gives this fairly long scene a bit more momentum. There are a few more references to Sephiroth before the track eventually comes to an ambiguous, unresolved close. Wow, there sure was a lot hiding in that track. Did I miss any secrets? Definitely let me know in the comments. And while you are clicking on the comments section, if your mouse cursor or thumb happens to accidentally click the like button, don't worry about it. Thank you, even. And if you're feeling particularly clumsy, there's a link to my Patreon in the video description as well. Look at you tumbling onto that link! You're such a klutz! Anyway, we have one episode left in Chapter 4, but before you click away, stick around for Part 3 of Midgar Mysteries coming up next. Man, I think this investigator's about to crack this whole case wide open. I knew I could count on him. Okay, take care. Bye. Previously on Midgar Mysteries.
Got a call from one Colonel Lodbrok, Wutai emissary. He was trying to track down the identity of the composer of his theme. The song in question? Well, it sounds like this. Yeah, it's a big brouhaha of a track full of bravado, big egos, and bigger guitar licks. The problem is that track comes from the slot machine simulator known as Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, and Square Enix hasn't released an official soundtrack for that quote-unquote game. Motifs from Mr. Lodbrok's theme show up in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth inside a subdued, ominous arrangement of a different track altogether. But that track didn't make it onto the Rebirth soundtrack either, so it's impossible to know for sure who composed the theme in question. Impossible, the man claimed. Clearly, he's not used to working with a true professional like myself. The name's Inspector RK. I'm the record keeper of who wrote what, and I promise you, we're getting to the bottom of this mystery. Last I left things, I was chasing Avalanche through the Corel Desert, hot on the tail of a particularly juicy lead. You hear that? That's the track Prison Break, and it's got that similar rock and or roll high-energy bluster of my client's theme, that's for sure. This track was composed by Mr. Keiki Kobayashi, a man who is already one of my top 2 suspects thanks to the evocative, gung-ho swagger of his Ace Combat series compositions. But this track here? Yeah, I think this just about seals the deal. I lost track of Avalanche and their red buggy in the sand waves, but frankly, I had all I needed. It was time to start the long trip back to Midgar. Took a helicopter from Gold Saucer to Costa del Sol to catch my return trip home aboard the Shinra 8. Called Mr. Lodbrok from a beachside payphone as I waited to board. Told him to meet me at my office in a day's time. He seemed plenty eager to hear what I had to say. Maybe even too eager. Ominous clouds started rumbling on the horizon as the Shinra 8 started its journey east across the ocean. We were halfway to Junon when the big sea started to overwhelm us. We braced, but not hard enough. The storm sent me flying. I was out cold before I even hit the waves. I remember waking up alone on an island. No, that wasn't true. There was a boy there too.
Greetings! Funny seeing you here.
Who the... Where am I?
Welcome to the Rador Archipelago. This is, or at least was, a beautiful place home to varied fauna and flora and wonderfully diverse cultures. The Rador Archipelago? Do you hear that?
I followed the boy's gaze skyward, where a large condor blotted out the sun. The creature cried out a beautiful song. A song so loud, so powerful, so familiar.
It seems to be getting dark,
said the boy. Indeed it is, I responded, entranced.
Do not forget what you've come to find.
What I've come to find? You mean Mr. Lodbrok's theme? But I found that. Mr. Keiki Kobayashi wrote it. Didn't he?
Didn't he? Well, you know what they say.
03-3.25. By now, the shadow cast by the condor had grown so large, so dark that I could barely see the boy, nor the place where he stood. I tried stepping forward, reaching out toward him, but stepped onto nothing and began to fall. My eyes adjusted to the light, my body to the rocking motion, and my ears to the crashing waves. The strange vision of a boy and an island and a condor vanished in an instant, as ephemeral as sand coursing through fingers. I was awake again. Better yet, I was alive and still aboard the Shinra 8 that had withstood the storm.
Are you okay, sir? You took a real tumble in the middle of the storm.
I slowly stood up and saw Junon on the horizon, illuminated with a golden sky. Within the day, I was back in Midgar. Mr. Lodbrok was likely already at my office waiting for me. But as I approached the building, something caught my eye. There were 3 big, burly, unknown men waiting for me at the door. Strange. None of these men looked anything like Mr. Lodbrok. They hadn't spotted me yet, so I went around back and entered via the fire escape. I approached the entrance from the inside and stuck my ear to the door, see if I could figure out what these oafs wanted.
Boss said he should be home by now. What gives?
Quit your worrying. I'm sure he'll be here any minute.
He better. I'm aching for some bones to crush.
Whoa, hold your adamantoise, brother. Remember what Boss said. If he's a gullible chump who still thinks it's Kobayashi, we don't lift a finger. Let him have his moment in the sun. But remember, if he starts sniffing around, looking into you-know-who, well, that's when we can have ourselves a little party. That's right. Boy, am I looking forward to this.
My head was spinning. I wasn't sure who sent these goons, but if what they said was even remotely true, then I was missing something damn important. Suddenly, I remembered the strange fortune I'd received back in Gold Saucer. An island left within your wake calls back to you for your own sake. A soaring tune that's full and clear before it starts to disappear. Have you perhaps made some mistake? I needed to go back to the drawing board. Home wasn't safe anymore, so I packed a few supplies, then went back out through the fire escape. Took a train topside and made my way back to Shinra HQ. Greased a few elbows and was able to gain access to their classified archives. There was something I needed to look into. Found a dossier about Project Zero soldiers and their highly classified assignment on the Rador Archipelago. The leader of that mission was none other than my client, Mr. Glenn Lodbrok. He'd mentioned to me in passing having a history with Shinra, but this was something else. Before his time as a Project Zero soldier, Mr. Lodbrok was just a regular soldier candidate, and while most of that information had been redacted out of the archives, I could still tease out something big. The man had lied to me. Here I was thinking Mr. Lodbrok was from Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, but his existence predates that game. You're looking at archival footage of Mr. Lodbrok in the long-dead Battle Royale mobile game Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier. Not to be confused with Mr. Lodbrok's narrative arc in Ever Crisis, also called The First Soldier. Keep up, will ya? And I know what you're thinking. Sure, Mr. Lodbrok might have shown up in The First Soldier, but his theme is from Ever Crisis, so who cares about this older First Soldier game? I care. Because both The First Soldier and Ever Crisis were announced at the same time on the same day in 2021. And while these two titles were made by different developers, our overlords at Square Enix likely had equally ambitious plans for both projects. But as any history book worth its salt will teach you, attempting to compete with Fortnite is a fool's errand, while on the flip side, adding swimsuits to a gacha game with Tifa in it will literally print money forever.
Okay. Okay. So that's that. That's that, you know? What are we talking about again?
So it goes, and so it was, that The First Soldier was nearly dead on arrival, while Ever Crisis continues to be a resounding moneymaker for Square Enix. And so it is possible that many of The First Soldier's narrative ideas might have been scrapped and could very well have made their way into Ever Crisis. On January 11th, 2023, The First Soldier died so that Ever Crisis, 8 months later, could live. We had gotten a glimpse at Mr. Lodbrok in the opening cutscene of The First Soldier, and while that wasn't much, it was a taste, which supplants him as an original character not from Ever Crisis but from The First Soldier, which raises the following question. Had The First Soldier lived on for another year or so, would we have first heard Mr. Lodbrok's theme there instead? Was Mr. Lodbrok's theme written for Ever Crisis or for The First Soldier? These are impossible questions to answer concretely, but I knew I had to take a closer look at the composer credits for The First Soldier. Unlike Ever Crisis, The First Soldier did get an official soundtrack release, and while Mr. Nobuo Uematsu and Mr. Mitsuto Suzuki share a few composer credits, this score is predominantly the work of Mr. Shotaro Shima and Mr. Ryo Furukawa, both of whom also contributed to Ever Crisis and were among our list of 8 suspects. But I thought I'd eliminated those two. Too much gusto for Mr. Furukawa, too much bravado for Mr. Shima. But seeing their names listed right here and no one else, it shook me. These two are the only composers who worked on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, and Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier. Was I wrong to have dismissed these two so quickly? And then, suddenly, it hit me like a chocobo going 80 clicks on a freeway. While reviewing the end credits to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I spotted something I'd missed the last time. Original music composed by Takeharu Ishimoto and Hibiki Yamazaki. Mr. Takeharu Ishimoto, that's the Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII composer, so it makes sense he would be credited here since his music shows up in Chapter 9 of Rebirth. But who the hell is this other guy? I decided to double-check the Ever Crisis credits while I was at it, and to my surprise, what do I see? Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier original composer, Hibiki Yamazaki. What in hell is this about? This man who isn't even listed in the official soundtrack to The First Soldier. All this time. Could this be our answer? I scoured a few other aisles of the archives, searching for some reason. Eventually came across Mr. Hibiki Yamazaki's file, where I discovered that he is, or at least was, an employee of the music production company Otonowa, from which he provided his services on such titles as Bayonetta 3 and, of course, Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier. I learned Japanese at the tender age of 1, so I can tell you that Otonowa means the harmony of sound. The harmony of sound, eh? Chasing the lead upstream led me to another epiphany. The president and founder of Otonowa is none other than Mr. Ryo Furukawa. Funny, I can't seem to get away from this guy. Interesting. But it doesn't explain why Mr. Yamazaki would be credited in such a unique way in Ever Crisis and Rebirth's credits. Just what exactly was his role on these games? I could hear security making their way to me in the archives, so I snuck out through a bathroom vent and made my way to Sector 3. Went to an internet cafe and did some rawing. That's what they call Googling out here. Rawing, short for Shinrawing, since Shinra owns everything. They even make their own phones. Anyhow, after a bit of sleuthing, I found out two things. The first, this Yamazaki's one hell of a cook. He's got himself a cooking channel on YouTube.
ようこそ。はい、これ煮卵ちゃんね。ネギ散らして。急いで。時間と勝負。弁が伸びます。
Fascinating. Next, I found Mr. Yamazaki's Twitter account, and with it, old tweets pointing back to his first soldier compositions. 3 of them in particular. They were all slight and seasonal, which might explain why none of them made it onto the official soundtrack. He might simply have composed these after the official soundtrack had been released, hence the omission. And yet, Mr. Yamazaki's name shows up in the Rebirth credits of all places. Why would it show up there, and in such a prominent way? Unless there was another reason his name showed up in the Rebirth credits. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and thought back to my lengthy playthrough of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. The synapses-strewn mental Rolodex began to spin back at blistering speeds. I recalled my entire playthrough, each scene playing back in rapid succession. Each scene and each track. The answer was here. It had to be. Wait. But, of course. Before I can ponder the revelation a moment longer, I feel a heavy hand on my right shoulder.
Enjoying yourself?
I turned around to see the same 3 goons who were camped out in front of my office just earlier.
Couldn't help yourself to a little snooping, huh?
I feel something pressed up against my back.
And to think it was going so well.
I attempt to defuse the situation. Listen, gentlemen, I think we can come to a reasonable... But before I can finish my sentence, I feel a bag go over my head and the biting pain of a swift hit to the back of my skull.
Yeah, that's enough snooping for one day. Besides, there's someone who wants to see you.
I sense the men begin to pull me up and off the chair as I drift into unconsciousness. I didn't know where they were taking me, but I was ready. I knew who composed Mr. Glenn Lodbrok's theme.